Welcome to the Produce Moms Podcast, where we believe there is a produce mom in all of us. I'm Lori Taylor, founder and CEO of the Produce Moms. For 10 years, I sold fresh produce to over 300 grocery stores in the U.S. And today, my team and I are fully focused on inspiring people to eat more fruits and vegetables. This show is just one of the ways that we hope to inspire you and your family to eat more produce and live a better life. If you like what you're hearing on the podcast, join our community of almost 40,000 in all 50 states and over 30 countries by visiting theproducemoms.com/subscribe. And be sure to subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes. Thanks for being here. Enjoy today's show.
Welcome back, everyone. It's another edition of the Produce Moms Podcast. And today we're really diving in to a topic that I know means a lot to all of our listeners, all consumers of fresh produce across the United States and really across the world. We're going to really dive into food safety. We're going to, specifically talk about the Romaine situation. And we've brought in a true industry expert, a woman who works hand in hand with the growers of, Romaine here in the United States. Her name is Sonia Salas. She is the Senior Director of Science and Technology at Western Growers. So Sonia, welcome to the Produce Moms Podcast. Thank you for being an expert and an industry voice that we can lean on to ask some of these questions.
Thank you for the invitation, Lori.
Yeah, we're really glad you're here. So we have to talk about this topic. I mean, we received a lot of inquiry at the Produce Moms from our followers about the Romaine situation. And of course, we always default to organizations such as Western Growers to lead that messaging so that we know how to, explain the status so that people know their fresh produce is safe to eat, specifically the Romaine recently. But, before we really dive into those details, because I've got a lot of questions for you, I think it's probably important to just explain to all of our listeners, what is Western Growers? And tell us a little bit more about your role at that organization.
Thank you again. I appreciate the opportunity. And yes, Western Growers is a trade association that's been around for 93 years. Western Growers represents farms and handlers of fresh produce in Arizona, California, Colorado, and New Mexico. Our members produce half of the nation's fresh fruits, vegetables, and tree nuts, and even half of the American's fresh organic produce. I even know that in some cases, it can be more than 50%. For instance, our members in California and Arizona grow the majority of leafy greens in the country. Mm-hmm. We're talking about 94%. And wow, some of those 94%. Members, it's a majority of it. And the last thing I was going to say is the members also farm through the United States and other countries. So we have a broad reach.
Sure. Yeah, you guys, to reiterate, a lot of the folks that listen to our podcast are aware of this, but just to reiterate, especially if you're new to the Produce Moms, your growers definitely have to follow the sun in order to, make sure that we have that 365-day availability of our favorite fruits and vegetables. So, wow, Sonia, I had no idea 94% of our leafy greens are grown by your Western Grower members.
Yeah, in California and Arizona, through the leafy greens marketing agreement, most of those, the lettuce, the leafy greens are produced in the country.
Wow. Yeah. So, food safety, obviously with your background, being focused on science and technology, that's really what food safety is all about. For everyone that's listening, I sat for 10 years at the sales desk in the supply chain, selling fresh produce to grocers. But at my former employer, we also had, we were receiving tons of produce on a daily basis into our warehouse, but we also had an in-house processing facility. And I'll tell you what, the standing mantra when I was working in the supply chain was food safety is our top priority. And, that still carries on to every grower, every organization, anyone I meet in this industry. That's definitely a common theme. Everyone agrees food safety is our top priority in fresh produce. So if you could please tell us how food safety is a top priority for the at Western Growers and frankly, for all farmers, not just your members.
Yeah, totally agree on the perspective on food safety, it is a top priority. Food safety has always been a top priority for Western growers. Western growers has been leading this space from the beginning. For instance, Western growers developed the first food safety guidelines for the produce industry in 1997. These were used as a template later to develop their first FDA guidance in 1998. And after that, we have developed and updated food safety commodity-specific guidelines and really being the architects of industry efforts such as the leafy greens marketing agreement, which, by the way, uses specific guidelines that have actually influenced current requirements under the new FDA's produce regulation. So just a few words, Western growers has led the produce industry on several different challenges and issues in driving industry practices. We continue to do that. I've been with Western growers since 2007, and now as a Senior Director of Science and Technology, I'm responsible for monitoring food safety issues, regulatory changes, scientific and technological advancements. So I'm really proud and to have the opportunity to do this.
Yeah, you got a really important job, Sonia. It's of critical importance, really, and I love what you just said there. It's important to emphasize that trade organizations and leadership organizations like Western Growers, they're working in unison with our federal agencies. You mentioned the FDA. I'm sure you work with all of those federal regulatory
agencies. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. It's been a really rewarding experience. Of course, we have experienced challenges, as you know, but we're here to continue to support the public and the industry.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's a great backstory. So, it's really time that we dive into the issue that's been affecting so many Americans, both from, Yuma last year, California most recently. Both of those regions, you guys, those are regions that are, that's where Western growers, their members come from those regions. So Sonia is a great person to talk about outbreaks, specifically these Romaine outbreaks, which have occurred, like I said, in the regions that Western growers represent. So I guess, Sonia, it's probably important that we start at the top. How does an outbreak even start? Like, how do people know that there's an outbreak?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. Well, usually, but not always, foodborne outbreaks are detected by the Center for Disease and Control Prevention, CDC. So CDC actually uses a national laboratory network that's called PulseNet. And with that, what they are allowed to do is look for data and results of sick patients, and then they can determine if ill people from different areas are infected by a common food item. So after they get some data and they have some information, then they're tasked with determining the source of an outbreak. They interview sick patients as part of the process. Those patients are asked questions regarding the food they have consumed. And of course, there are challenges in the process, but once they get to that determination, they make a decision, they identify a source, then they work with the FDA to continue an investigation process. And both agencies work together to confirm the source of the outbreak as fast as they can. And once they have this information ready, they make the public aware by releasing advisories. That's the way they make everyone aware through their public announcements for the agencies.
Okay. So is an advisory like a press release? What would you say an advisory is, or is it an outbreak, or is it a recall? There's even just within the vernacular of these situations. I think consumers need clarity. Like, what is an advisory versus an outbreak versus a recall?
Right. Again, great questions. So an advisory is an official announcement that is published by these two agencies to announce that there is a food safety issue. Now, the food safety issue could be an outbreak or a recall, but there are differences. Yeah, clearly, a foodborne outbreak is the actual event where more than two people result sick due to a consumption of a food item. And when a foodborne outbreak happens, there is an investigation. There might be still contaminated product in the market, and this finding might actually trigger a food recall, which is a withdrawal of products from the market to avoid additional people from becoming sick. Now, recalls are not always linked to an outbreak. Recalls are sometimes a result of a quality or food safety issue that has been detected by, let's say, a manufacturer or a distributor of a particular food item. And there could be things like mislabeling, cross-contamination, or anything like that. So the produce industry in this case, it's very quick in completing a recall to ensure food products that might be misbranded or adulterated are removed from commerce immediately.
Yeah, and there are mandated recalls and there are voluntary recalls.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that? And as someone who specializes in science and technology, I mean, is there a point of differentiation, or from your perspective, all consumers need to pay attention to recalls?
Yeah, so the terms can be a little confusing. If I'm a consumer, I won't really understand the terms about what is voluntary, mandatory, required, recalls, and why those terms are used. But to clarify, FDA now with the new regulations under the Food Safety Modernization Act has the authority to require recalls. So even if we are talking about voluntary recalls, those are required by FDA. So I hope that clarifies.
Yeah, no, that helps a lot. So it sounds like, who are the key players when an outbreak occurs? It sounds like, obviously from a consumer standpoint, you have your sick consumers who all ate the same item. And then you have, what are the federal organizations? Is it CDC driven, FDA driven, a combination of the both?
Yeah. So when it comes to an outbreak, CDC and FDA work together before any official announcements are made.
Got it.
When I've seen recalls, FDA, just for a different type of reason, not necessarily an outbreak, FDA takes a more active role on those.
Got it. Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's a lot of, in addition to the fact that people are getting sick, there are side effects that maybe consumers don't think about when these recall and outbreaks happen. So when an outbreak happens that may or may not result in a recall, could you shed some light on how that affects your farmer members, your growers that are part of Western Growers? How does a situation like what has happened with Romaine, how does that really affect the farmers?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I know last year was very difficult for Romaine lettuce producers. These producers take to heart any potential impacts to public health and had very unfortunate events to deal with. So in that particular, those two particular instances last year, there were lots of impacts, obviously regarding public health, but also we don't think about other impacts like food waste and economic loss in many cases.
Right.
Yeah, we're aware of, let's say after the CDC, FDA advisory before Thanksgiving, there was a really broad advisory. So basically the Romaine industry closed down. And by doing that, there were millions and millions of dollars in losses of these crop that necessarily wasn't implicated, was impacted. So we're talking about crop that was not harvested and also storing coolers that was destroyed and it was not contaminated. So there were massive losses. Right? I mean,
they just dump the product.
Yes. So it has several impacts. This is something we don't want. Obviously, we'll continue to work. help.
Yeah, and one thing too, Sonia, and I know you and your whole team at Western Growers, and all the leadership and trade organizations that serve fresh produce growers, specifically the growers of Romaine, we all work really hard at this. But one thing that I hope our listeners can understand is if there is an outbreak around Thanksgiving, like we had this year, it's a fresh living product. It's a plant. It's a vegetable. Within 3 weeks, like even if what was contaminated would have been decomposed. It no longer would be edible or in existence. And that's one of my frustrations as someone who's very passionate and has dedicated my life and my career to fresh produce. One of my top frustrations is the misunderstanding of the fact that the romaine that was harvested around Thanksgiving time that was, part of this outbreak, by the time, late December comes around, that's not in the supply chain anymore. That romaine has decomposed. It doesn't exist. And yet at the same time, as a shopper, I live in the Midwest, and I was still hard pressed to find romaine stocked in my grocery store.
Right. It
was like total chaos and misunderstanding about if something is in fact contaminated. Yes, we must remove it from the supply chain, but we also have to be realistic about when that product is again safe to eat and when it can be, re-implemented and reintroduced to the supply chain.
That's totally accurate. And we're dealing with a highly perishable crop. And this is hard to understand, right, for many, many people. Because by the time all the announcements and the process take place, that product is no longer in the market. And so, yes, I agree with your view on this. Yeah,
so it's obviously a confusing situation. I mean, even though, Sonia, you've dedicated your life to studying the science and technology and advocating for the food safety and, hold a leadership organization at the trade association that represents 94% of the romaine growers, in the nation. I mean, we still are at a point where it seems to be a lot of gray area still. So could you shed some light on, the steps that have been taken since this most recent romaine outbreak? Specifically, there's a new labeling system. What does this mean? What other types of proactive measures are is the industry and organizations like the CDC taking?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So the produce industry at large has reacted quickly and worked united to get to the bottom of any of these issues. And it might not be obvious or look like a quick response or action necessarily, but several produce groups and growers have come together, and just last year they formed a leafy green task force, even before FDA completed an investigation report regarding the romaine lettuce outbreak in Yuma. This is just one of the efforts that have happened in the last year. This effort actually resulted in recommendations that were adopted last year. And now this year we have another continuous effort, which is the Romaine Lettuce Task Force. And this is meant to dive deeper on several issues that require further work. So as a result of all this work, industry work, the labeling system, the consumers have seen, and the many people are now getting to see, it's something that came up because what we were working these efforts, FDA and CDC had concerns about the scope of the recent outbreak. And the thing or the issue was really regarding labeling. So FDA cleared certain areas from their outbreak investigation, but it was obvious that some buyers, retailers, restaurants, and consumers had challenges identifying what product was not included in the investigation. So by adding this harvest date and region, it was helpful in those situations. But I gotta tell you that I do not believe this labeling is doing much at the end for the end consumer.
I completely agree with you.
Yeah,
people don't know what it even means.
Right. I don't expect the consumer should have the responsibility to understand the meaning of different harvest dates and growing regions. Really, the key here is that there is a need for consistent tracking of the same information along the supply chain. So labeling is actually an issue that is being addressed on current Romaine task force in with the industry working with government. And I have a hope that this work is going to enhance labeling issues and traceability efforts.
Yeah, I agree. And there is incredible traceability and blockchain technology within the supply chain of fresh fruits and vegetables in the United States right now. So I definitely agree with Sonia. I anticipate a ton of advancements as it relates to the labeling. And I do think that we've got a step in the right direction here with these Romaine labels, but we are far from a solution that's going to give consumers, that restored confidence that they need to have and that they frankly deserve after an outbreak. So, this is definitely a situation that at the Produce Moms, we're going to continue to keep our eye on. We want to help bring the facts and the truth to our audience. So it's a real pleasure to have you on today. Very thankful for the work that you do, Sonia, at Western Growers. And thank you so much for being part of today's podcast and, shedding so much light and truth, evidence, fact on a situation that affects us all. So I really appreciate your time today.
Right. No, thank you. Thank you, Lori, for giving me the opportunity. I do want to make one point, a last point, just because I want to make sure people understand that, we support, let's say, labeling and traceability systems. We believe they are proactive response serves that are the public and produce industry. So we're focused on preventive controls, and we'll continue to lead new preventive controls and engage in industry efforts. And every time we can be a source, we're here to answer questions or support anyone who needs our help. And really appreciate the time, Lori, that you've given us to talk about these issues.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And, before we say goodbye to our listeners and close out today's show, a couple, just kind of tactics that are going to be really important for our listeners today. First and foremost, where do consumers go to get the most up-to-date information and status when there is an outbreak?
Thank you.
Where do you recommend they go?
Yeah. Well, I got to say the most reliable sources are the two agencies that actually work on these issues. So I'll say CDC and FDA. I do want to say that sometimes there may be confusion with some of the messaging. And so in those instances, I do suggest, encourage people to reach out, trade associations or other groups that can put more clarity in those issues, and just be cautious, look for information that it's actually verified.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, Western Growers is certainly that voice of trust and collaboration within the fresh produce industry. So we'll make sure for all of our listeners today that we link in the show notes, how they can actually check out your organization and connect with you guys online. So, Sonia, I can't thank you enough for the work that you do and for your time today. We have a tradition at the Produce Moms. We always let our guests have the final word and close out the show. So I'm going to say goodbye to you and thank you, but I'm going to throw the mic back to you to say goodbye to all of our listeners today.
Thank you to you and all your listeners, and continue the good work. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Produce Moms Podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a featured guest, just send an email to lori@theproducemoms.com. We know there is a produce mom in you because there's a produce mom in all of us. Join our community on Facebook and all social platforms. Help us change the way America eats. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.